good morning everybody. Thanks for coming back to my DIY channel. This is Dave here once again with another DIY video. Again, we're back in the garage for probably the most challenging project I've undertaken since I have become interested in working on cars. Today we are going to replace the steering rack in this 2008 Toyota Sienna. Before we get started, if you like DIY videos, videos that try to give a little bit of information about how you might tackle a project that you might otherwise leave to a mechanic or other professional. If you think you can do it yourself, you're willing to get your hands a little dirty, a little greasy, take a chance on saving yourself possibly a lot of money safely, then please subscribe to our channel, hit the notification button. If you like our video, please hit the thumbs up. If you don't, hit the thumbs down and leave comments, questions, suggestions, criticisms of all kinds. We appreciate them, and we thank you in advance for taking the time to watch our video today. This is certainly the most advanced project I've undertaken. This is well beyond just changing the oil or changing transmission fluid. What got us to this point that we needed to make this decision to replace the steering rack? For some time we've had an issue with a torn boot on the passenger side of this rack, but it was a small tear, gave us only a small leak, and as long as we monitored the power steering fluid level, it was not an issue. That leak has over time now worsened. We now believe we're developing a similar leak on the driver's side, and have also started encountering some stability problems with some of the onboard systems that have set some codes, all of which leads us down the road of believing that this is a steering rack replacement issue. These particular vans are basically Sherman tanks. We have had this car for 11 years, has 130,000 miles, and it has been almost trouble-free. But a bit of a problem they have had over the years is problems with the steering rack. What ends up happening is the seals on the end of the rack fail. It causes power steering fluid to seep out and simply rest or pool in the bottom of the boot, and that material, that liquid, is corrosive to the boot material. So eventually it eats through the boot and causes a leak. You can replace the boots, but you haven't solved the problem because the failed seals are what allows the fluid to escape into the boots and cause the failure. That combined with the problems that we started encountering with stability control and slide warnings going off on very subtle turns at even moderate speeds led me to believe that the time had come to do the rack replacement. I did quite a bit of research on some Toyota forums and about this issue, about steering rack replacements, and also noticed that when I put an OBD reader onto the vehicle, I found that it was storing a code for an improbable steering angle sensor detected. Basically what happens is when you have the vehicle on the road and you're driving down the road, when you hit about 20 miles an hour for a certain number of seconds, the computer will read a value from the steering angle sensor, compare that to the previous value, and use that as a calculation of an offset. So where is the steering rack, where are the steering wheels compared to where the steering wheel is? If those numbers don't make sense, the computer will say, I don't believe it, something's wrong, you better go check it. That's one of the things that we're seeing. It's not frequent, but it's intermittent. All of those things, the VSC lights, the stability lights, the loss of ABS, that recurring pattern led me down a road. While there were some other possible solutions, the overarching theme was replace the steering rack. And since I knew we had two bad boots, it made sense. So the only other solution, the only other question to answer is, do we go OEM or do we go replacement? I was originally perfectly happy with the idea of going with a third-party remanufactured rack solution. I priced racks anywhere from $200 to $350 from various third-party vendors. I was okay with that until I started reading some forums about people who had gone through this on Siennas in particular and vehicles in general, that you have to be very cautious about remanufactured racks. Some people get them and they work just fine, but the worst case that spooked me the most was one who had bought a cheap rack from a remanufactured rack site, thought it would be okay, put it in, seemed everything was just fine, and then he drove it about 2,000 miles and it started leaking again. He had to do the whole job over. I don't want to do that. So I have chosen to go OEM. Now, obviously that doesn't guarantee I won't have problems, but I do believe it shortens the odds. This rack for this vehicle retails from a Toyota dealer for over $700, and most reman places sell them for between $250 and $350. I found a Toyota dealer online, Toyota South Atlanta, that sells these racks for a discount. They are OEM racks. They sold it for $400 and I believe it was $480 plus shipping. So that's the route we've chosen to go. And videoing this myself, I don't have the help of an extra cameraman today, so I can't promise the video will be as explicit as I would like. We're going to do our best. It's going to be very close quarters under here for some very tight bolt fitments, hard places to reach your fingers in. I'm going to have a little light on my head that will try to illuminate things, and I'm going to try as best I can to keep oriented, because it's real easy when you get under a car and start videoing to see, to get lost where you are. So I'm going to try my best to keep that straight for you. We're going to organize our work in 3 parts. Number 1, we're going to detach the tie rod ends from the steering knuckles on both sides. That's number 1. Number 2, in order to get to the bolts that mount the steering rack onto the frame, we have to loosen the bolts that hold the stabilizer bar, and that goes from side to side. We loosen those bolts. We don't have to take the stabilizer bar out. We just have to move it up and out of the way so we can get to the bolts that hold the steering rack in. We take out, that's part 2. And then removing the bolts in the steering rack, and then removing the nut that secures, and the pinch bolt that secures the fork from the steering wheel, from the steering column into the input shaft, and then removing the power steering lines and allowing us to slide the rack out will be part 3. So we're going to have remove the suspension components, loosen the stabilizer bar, and then disconnect the steering shaft. And then the replacement will be a matter of reversing that sequence. So with all that, let's go ahead and get started. First thing we're going to do, safety first as always, we're going to secure our parking brake. And we're going to note here that the back wheels are chalked, as we always do. Safety is first, paramount. And one of the things that's most important to understand when we're doing this is that once the steering wheel is disconnected from the steering shaft, the input shaft, the steering wheel has to be held still. There is a mechanism called a clock spring inside the steering wheel that if this thing freewheels once it's disconnected, you can break that clock spring. There's wiring and other mechanisms related to the airbag, the steering column, some sensors, a bunch of wires. You do that and you're risking a really expensive and really ugly repair. And to prevent that, the best way to do it is to keep this thing secured and straight. When you park the vehicle, just before you get ready to put it up on jack stands, get this steering wheel as straight as possible and then secure it. So what I'm going to do is, I don't really have a good ratchet strap option, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to secure this with the seat belt. Try to do this while videoing at the same time. Threading this guy through. Getting some slack. Set this down for just a moment. Get a little bit more slack. There, engaged. So now, that should keep this guy from moving. Now, first thing we're going to do is we're going to loosen the lug nuts just a little bit before we jack it up. Loosen them all the way around. Factory spec for this thing is a 21 millimeter lug nut, but for some reason 22 seems to fit just a little bit better, so I have to go with what you know. We'll go ahead and get these loosened up, jacked up, take the lug nuts off and pull the wheels off. Won't show that for both wheels, just wanted to make sure that that was clear before we started. Loosen them on the ground and then put them back, taking them all the way off once the car's in the air. Okay, we've got the wheels off now, and so step 1 of the process is that we're going to loosen the tie rod ends. Now we're looking at the passenger side, excuse me, the driver's side left front. If I say left or right, left is always going to refer to the driver's side of the vehicle, as if you were in the vehicle. We didn't have any need to replace, and we're not going to be replacing these tie rod ends as part of this replacement. We're just going to be replacing the steering rack. Now, in keeping with our phased approach, step 1, we're just going to be loosening the tie rod ends from both sides on the wheel. make sure I've got that in focus. There we go. We're just going to be removing the connections from the tie rods into the steering knuckle. That's going to amount to removing that cotter pin, and then putting a whack on the side of that connection, and then loosening up that connection there in the knuckle. So we'll go ahead and get that done. We're going to take a pair of needle nose pliers and take out that cotter pin below, and then we will wrap that steering knuckle on the side to loosen the taper on the joint into the tie rod. Ow. There you go. And handy tip number one, never reuse cotter pins. We're going to take this 17mm castellated nut off. We've taken the cotter pin out. We'll just loosen this guy, and then we will separate this connection from the tie rod. Came off with no problem. Now, one trick to pop this loose, we're going to try to apply a little bit of a hammer force right here to the side. Oh. And if it gives you any grief, one suggestion is to take the castellated nut, thread it on temporarily the other direction, put it on upside down, and then take a little block of wood, put it underneath the bolt, the castellated nut, excuse me, and try to tap it that way. And just as I was about to holler uncle, I gave it one more gentle tap with the hammer, and out it came. Unfortunately, I just didn't have the camera on when I did it, so we're good to go. So with that loose, I'm going to go do the same thing to the opposite side, same process, so I won't video that. But the next thing we'll come up on will be step 2, when we start loosening the stabilizer bar bolts. And then we get to the meat and potatoes about unhooking the actual transmission, the power steering rack. Okay, we've got the tie rod ends out of both front wheels, and now that essentially finishes step 1, and that was loosening the tie rod ends. So now step 2 is to loosen the bolts that hold the stabilizer bar in place, and that blocks our access to the bolts that hold the steering rack in place. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to illustrate that by consulting our tome of knowledge in the Haynes teardown manual. This is the diagram that we're looking at right here, and I'll endeavor to put a better quality version of this on the final video. The stabilizer bar has 2 connecting bushings that hold it onto the cradle. There's a bolt on both sides. We release that bolt, and then we should free the stabilizer bar. Now, with that picture in mind, let's take a look at what that looks like underneath the van. We're a little later in the morning now, so the stabilizer bar is this guy right here. It runs up and curls back toward the end, and the bolts, that is where we're heading. That way, there's a bolt there, there's one stabilizer bolt there, and then another on the opposite side. We need to loosen those 2. The question I have is whether loosening that will be sufficient to allow us room to just rotate the bar out of place, or will I also have to disconnect the bar here? I'm hoping I don't have to. I may have to. I just don't know, and that's what I'm going to find out. Okay, we're going to try to take a look at this a little bit better from underneath the car. Now, I'm on the driver's side looking forward, so we're underneath the left side, and now we're looking up at this main cross member. This is the stabilizer bar right here that we're loosening. The bolt, the fastener, is this guy right here. It's a little hard to see. This is the bolt we've got to loosen. This is the fastener that we've got to loosen. And there is a complementary one on the other side that I think is just out of range of the camera, but it's in approximately the same position, just on the other side. That's what we've got to loosen. We get those things loose, and then we'll see if we can move the stabilizer bar out of the way to access the mounting bolts for the steering rack. Was that bracket right there. And I'm trying to point here, this guy right here. The picture indicated to me that this bracket rested right on the steering rack, which is this guy right here, but it really doesn't. I need to detach this because this carries the power steering rails that we'll eventually disconnect. So I've got to disconnect this guy. I've got to free that. Eventually, we will disconnect the power steering inputs that are right there. And again, I apologize for the close angles. They are right there. That's them right there. I've got two little line wrenches that will free those guys up. This is one of the actual steering rack bolts that has to come out, and that is the steering rack itself. I'm going to try to loosen that bolt and see if we can poke that through without moving the stabilizer bar. I don't think I'm going to be able to, but if I can, then it will be a bonus. The corresponding bolt here on the other side is right there, if my camera aim is correct. So both of those have to come off. I think this one on the left side will clear the stabilizer bar with no problem. The other one, we're not so sure, but we're going to give it a try. Well, after due consideration, I have come to the realization that there's no way to get to that bolt without rotating the stabilizer bar out of the way. The manual is correct. Surprise, surprise. But you know, you learn. I have been offline. I haven't photographed what I've been doing for about the last half hour. I was hoping that I could figure out a way to get to that bolt right there. That you can't, I guess, can't quite. Yeah, that bolt right there, and then loosen that guy. And then poke the bolt out the other end. But there is no way. I've tried 3 or 4 different wrench combinations. I can't get a socket on it. I can't get my open end because I can't get enough leverage on it to loosen it because the tailpipe or the exhaust pipe is in the way. I'm not going to take the tailpipe or the exhaust pipe off. Back to the cat. I don't want to mess with that. So the opposite choice is to go back to the other side, and that is that bolt right there that I'm trying to shine my headlight on. And the only way to get to that bolt, that's clear. If you lose that bolt out, then you don't care about the other end. The only problem is now the stabilizer bar is in the way, which is what we had to do to begin with. So we're going to have to figure out a way to get those 2 stabilizer bolts out and hopefully lift that guy out of the way without having to come back here and disconnect it right here. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, we're here on the stabilizer bar bushing. We have a 12mm bolt. We have access to a ratchet. Again, we're on the driver's side. This is the rear bolt. There are 2. There's one ahead of this that you cannot see. It is the other side. That's the other bolt that we've got to get to, and it's much more cramped access. It's just slow going, and the bottom line is you just have to be patient, because I'm not even sure that a power tool, I don't have any air tools, I don't have a compressor. I suppose an air tool would make this thing go quicker, but it wouldn't help access. I don't think any kind of power tool was going to help the access on this thing. This is just cramped all the way around. There's just no way around it. So we're going to go ahead and get this bolt out of here, and we'll proceed. Okay, I simply ran out of arms and hands and fingers to hold all the bolts and hold the camera and hold the ratchet. I was able to get both of these bolts off of the stabilizer arm bracket with a 12mm socket with a little bit of an extension to get it over that line right there. It took some doing, but once it breaks loose, it's not held on with a great deal of breakneck force. I was able to pull it off by hand on just a simple little 12-inch wrench. It was not brute force on. So those 2 are off. So now I'm going to go over here and get the same 2 bolts off on this side. We were able to use the 12mm head with a little extension to get both of the bracket bolts off of the stabilizer bar retaining bracket. We now have all 4 of them off. It was a little bit easier to get the wrench on the top of the bolt from the access from the passenger side wheel. Again, we're looking now on the passenger side. I was able to get the bolt on and then use it to identify it and then bring the socket in from the other side, and then was able to turn the bolt with just barely more than just average hand pressure. It was not on super tight, so that was a fortunate break. Now, the whole point of loosening these, but not loosening the bolts at the ends near the steering knuckle, is to see if we can rotate this bar out of the way so we can access the steering bolts. And the good news is, we can. It's not going to be easy, but we can do it. This now moves this moves the stabilizer bar out of the way, enough for us to be able to get to that bolt over there that mounts the steering knuckle, that mounts the steering rack into the frame. One little thing that we'll show here to show how close we are. That bolt right there is one of the bolts that goes into the steering rack. So I think I was correct originally in that thinking I could probably access this bolt without moving the stabilizer bar. I also think I was correct in that I could not get to the other stabilizer, the other bolt into the steering rack without moving the stabilizer bar. So we had to do it. We're going to take a look at that. Looks to me like about a 17 or maybe an 18 millimeter bolt. Pretty good sized bolt. So we'll identify the right ratchet and we'll see if we can go ahead and knock this guy loose. Okay, we are finally having some more success with this passenger side bolt for the rack mount, for the steering rack mount. I have been trying several combinations of wrenches and extensions to get this bolt off. It has been on super brutally tight. I finally decided that the extensions weren't going to work from underneath, so I came in now, and what I've done is I have approached it from the passenger side wheel well. I'm looking into the boot, and there's my wrench on that bolt into the steering rack. I've actually gotten this loose. I'm sorry that I've just not been able to show you the actual action of loosening the bolt. But to get this thing started, what I had to do is I've had to take that socket and then I leveraged it with a long wrench like this to get the downward, to get the upward torque I needed to get that bolt loose. But it's finally come loose. So one bolt down, and then there is a little bracket that I will need to remove, and then we get to go do the same thing on the other side, and it's even more cramped. So we're going to continue to loosen this bolt. In fact, we'll see how I can't get this thing. It's loose and I'm turning it, but it's just, I'm going to have the wrench, so I'm going to have to turn the camera off right now. I'll be back after I've got the bolt out. That, my friends, is the passenger side bolt holding the steering rack in. This is the nut on the opposite side that once you've gotten it loose, you can probably back wrench this side and it might make things a little easier. I'll probably try to learn that lesson on the other side. On this side, we've got everything loose. There's a bracket we're going to detach, but we're going to work on getting the other bolt on the other side loose. Okay, we have just removed the 18 millimeter steering rack bolt from the driver's side. Again, we're just to orient ourselves, we're coming in from the driver's front side and getting the driver's side bolt out. It was obstructed by the stabilizer bar, which we've removed, and it was not nearly as difficult to get this bolt off as it was the other one, merely because of the weird angles. And that's the thing I'm finding as I'm doing this, and it's one of the reasons that I've had to put the camera down and not have been able to photograph as much as I would have liked of the actual wrench turning, because so many of the angles are just so awkward. It's not physically complicated. This is just a matter of getting a bolt to turn with a wrench at the right angle, at the right size, with the right amount of force. I mean, it's just the fittings in here are very tight corners. I ended up taking this 18 millimeter wrench and locking it on this side, and then extending the leverage I had on that with a long bolt. This long wrench to extend my leverage, and then gently pulling on it by putting this guy, my breaker bar through it. So I essentially had the wrench and then my ratchet and then my wrench, leverage that, and then I had my breaker bar coming through the wrench, pulling back this direction to loosen the bolt, and finally it just came loose. The only thing holding the steering rack in now are the two power steering lines and the actual bracket that mounts the steering shaft, the steering column into the input shaft. And there's one other bracket down there at the far end that I have yet to loosen, but that shouldn't be too difficult, it says here. So I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go, I'm going to look for those two power steering bolts, the power steering inputs. You can see them right there. When I edit the video, when I say there and there, I'll try my best to put some graphics on there to point where I'm showing. I can't see I can only see a little bit of what I'm videoing. The contrast on my preview screen's a little bit light, so I only have a general idea of what I'm looking at here. Those two fittings, there's one return line, one pressure hose and one return line. One's fitted with a clamp and then a little connector. What I did read was that it would be helpful to have some little what they call crawfoot wrenches to put on the end of a 3/8 inch extender socket to loosen those guys up, and that's what I'm going to do. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get a drain pan to collect the the power steering fluid that will come out when I pull those two lines off. So I'm going to get a drain pan and see if we can get those power lines loose. We're finally back where we're still trying to get the lines, the power steering lines off of the transmission. I've gotten one of them off and it's been an ordeal. You have no room at all to swing any normal wrenches or sockets in here. You just don't. You have to have what they call a stubby wrench, and a stubby wrench is basically a specialty short version of an open end wrench, or a crow's foot wrench, which is essentially a specialty attachment that looks like a line wrench or a flared end wrench, but accepts a 3/8 inch or a particular drive socket. They come in different drive sizes. One video I saw on a Sienna power steering teardown said that these nuts were 17 millimeters. They're not. On the 2008, this flare nut is 18 millimeters. I have finally gotten the top one loose. It's out and has already drained. I have a catch basin here. Once you start loosening that, and once you break it loose, it will drain profusely. So I advise that you have something underneath it to catch it. I am now working on the second one. The mistake that I made is that I loosened the mounting bolt first before I loosened these power steering lines, because when I was using some force to try to get the proper torque to loosen these power steering bolts, I was lifting up the whole rack because it was loose. And that's a mistake I wouldn't make again. So learn from my mistake, loosen these first, and make sure on a 2008 Sienna you've got an 18 millimeter crow's foot or an 18 millimeter stubby wrench to loosen these power steering lines. And we'll be back, because the next step is to loosen the coupler to the input, and then to release that bolt, and then we'll be ready to pull the power steering rack out. Okay, both of the power steering lines have been removed. We're looking at this from the driver's side wheel well, looking inboard toward the input shaft. It was an ordeal. They are both out, and our next step before we release the old power steering rack is to remove that bolt right there. That bolt is called the pinch bolt that holds that pinches, in effect, that fork against the steering column, against the steering gear, and basically makes the car steer. That is supposed to be a 12 millimeter bolt. I'm going to put a big extension on my socket wrench and turn that puppy loose, and then see what it's like to pry it. Okay, folks, I've set up the camera with about the best angle I can give you, and I promise it won't be perfect, but I'll at least be able to give you some idea of what we're working on now. We're going to be taking the 12 millimeter socket and the end of our extension, and we're going to be taking off that pinch bolt. One of the things the teardown manual will tell you to do is to mark the position of the pinch bolt, or the position of the orientation of the pinch bolt and the attachment clip with respect to the axle. so you make sure that you put this back in the same direction. Now it's hard, I don't have a paintbrush. I've got, best thing I could find is this yellow grease pencil. There, that put a pretty good mark on there. Well, here it comes, folks. All right, there is one each pinch bolt. Show you where this bolt is that we're getting ready to loosen before we release the drive shaft from the steering, excuse me, the steering shaft. We are looking at well, it's in shadow, unfortunately, of course. It is that guy right there where my finger's pointing, if you can see it. And I think it's about a 13 millimeter nut, if you can see it. And if not, you have to trust me. The bracket on the far side carrying one of the lines is free. All that remains now is to separate the steering shaft from the input shaft. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to take a pry bar and a hammer, and we're going to coax off the intermediate shaft off of the steering input shaft, and then we should be able to remove the steering rack. Well, folks, suffice it to say, it's been a little bit of a disappointing day. I realize that in the context of the amount of video that's been taken, it doesn't seem like it, but I've been going in and out all day getting one extra part, one extra straightener, one extra extender, the 18 millimeter crawfoot that you've simply got to have. And in fact, I actually looked at a Toyota Sienna repair manual, and they specify, they call it a special service tool to get that off. Everything is off except getting the intermediate shaft off of the spline on the existing steering rack. So I'm going to be really careful what I do there. There may be some other stuff. I'm going to look at that repair manual I found online a little bit further and see if I can get some more detail on it. It won't look like any different to you. It'll just be one continuous video, but it's about 7 o'clock in Oklahoma here. It's evening time. I started this about 9 o'clock. Again, it's not that this has been a difficult job in terms of complicated, it's not like I'm disassembling a transmission and rebuilding it. This is about getting to bolts in really awkward position. So we're going to take a break for tonight. We're going to move all of our tools and stuff inside and just have to leave the van out disassembled for right now. And it will be overnight for me, but it will be just a few seconds for you as we transition to the next morning. We'll start bright and shiny Saturday morning. We'll see you then, folks. Well, good morning, folks. It's Saturday morning, and we are going to be getting back at it after a night of sort of sleep. Ready to get back at the steering rack change on the Sienna. I want to give a special shout out to another YouTuber named Tom2RN. I had watched a video that he had done on an older Sienna steering rack replacement, and he was very, very helpful on answering some questions I had about some of the problems I was encountering. The issue that we left with last night was a little bit of difficulty getting the intermediate shaft off of the input spline on the existing rack. So we'll go ahead and set up. Got a fresh cup of coffee to get me going, that cup of ambition, as Dolly Parton used to say in 9 to 5. So we're going to get after it and see if we can't get this thing knocked out. Okay, I tried to put the camera back where we were last night. The lighting is not really good this morning. We're in some shadows because it's a cloudy morning, so there's not a lot of natural light. This is the input spline that we're talking about getting loose. I'm going to get my pry bar and we're going to try to tap this thing loose. Tried to do a little bit of reading. In addition, I think I mentioned in the closeout part yesterday that I had come across some Toyota online repair manuals about this, and apparently it's supposed to just come off. And I have read that some people do encounter a little bit of difficulty. For some people it just pops right out. For others it takes some effort, and it looks like mine's going to be one that requires some effort. So we're going to go ahead and just plug ahead and see if we can't get this knocked out. Now, as I try to get back into this, I'm wearing a little headlight that you probably saw in earlier parts of the video, I think. I'll try to shine some additional light in there, and one thing that occurs to me is I'm going to try to reach into that input spline there where the bolt was and just try to coax it apart even a little bit. I just don't know that the screw is quite long enough to reach up there. Ooh, that felt like it moved. Yes, it's off. It's off, ladies and gentlemen. We have slain the dragon. All right, that's a little bit, that light kind of tries to show you where we're looking at and why I think we're going to, unless I can rotate that thing down and get that thing underneath that stabilizer bar, we're going to have to pull that stabilizer bar. I'm going to try to rotate it down and pull it out, but I'm not too sure if we're going to be able to do that. We'll try. I felt like something was giving, and I noticed that some of the input lines were coming with me, and they shouldn't. They should stay behind. And then I realized there's another bolt that despite the fact that I looked up and down that, I thought I had inspected it enough and didn't see any other bolts. There's still one more bolt that I've got to loosen for those return lines, and I sure hope I haven't damaged the lines coming out with what I pulled out so far. That would not be good. I'll tell you one thing that's frustrating. When you're on your back like this, you're approaching bolts from backwards angles, you'd think something as simple as righty-tighty, lefty-loosey wouldn't fall apart on you, but your orientation gets all messed up. And then you realize you're tightening a bolt that you're trying to loosen. Get off the pot on deciding whether we have to release that suspension bar. This thing is sitting right there. And it sure seems like that thing is sitting right there. And I at least want to trick myself into believing I've got enough room under here to rotate the thing such that I could get the input shaft underneath the bar and pull it out, but I don't. And folks, there we have one shredded steering. But let's take a look at this labor that we went through. Here is the torn boot on the driver's side. This happened just recently. We started noticing a new puddle on the garage floor. And then that's when we also started noticing the stability problems, the stability lights going off. Here is our input shaft. It was kind of rusty and nasty, and we're still leaking a little bit of fluid. No big deal, who cares? And that's why this was a little bit difficult to get off. It had some corrosion on it, so I suppose, I guess a little WD-40 would not have been out of line there. Duh, now that I think about it. These are the lines that gave us so much grief. And here is the passenger side boot. Oh my gosh, I mean, it just looks like a gerbil has eaten through this thing where the seals failed. And I'm going to do the next step, which is to loosen this lock nut and spin off these tie rods on both ends. We're going to reuse those, and we'll count the number of threads to the position of the lock nut, and we'll count the number of revolutions to get as close as we can to where it is right now. We are in good shape. Thank God for the wisdom that he gave me to get this thing out, because I sure don't know what I'm doing. As I'm sure some of you may be watching this will attest to. But I'm learning patience. And God gave me the ability to do some things that I don't really have the skill to do. But we got through it. So one of the things we're going to do now is we're going to compare the old rack to the new rack, and we're going to transfer the tie rod ends. But what we want to do is at least give it a good enough start by transferring the tie rod ends in approximately the same location as they are on the original. First thing we're going to do is we're going to first of all note the length of these. These are even from the same manufacturer, J-Tech. Both of these have a sticker that they are from J-Tech. So guaranteed identical factory equipment. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to notice on this shaft right here, we're going to notice that the threads start in the same position, and we can see that this tie rod is locked in about this far. So what we're going to do is to get this lock nut in the right position, we're going to transfer it over here. We're going to just count the number of threads, or another number of valleys. Now I can see that I'm starting with this nut just above this edge. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Okay, 14. Now I don't have a big enough wrench, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to break that without one. We'll see. Okay, we have rearranged our wrenches a little bit. We've got a vice grip here holding this side of the tie rod down, and then we've got our 22mm wrench on this side that hopefully should let us there. Ah. So I took a little WD-40, in case that was out of frame too. I took a little WD-40 to clean out. There's a little bit of corrosion on that. So now what we're going to do is we're going to count 14 threads and put the jam nut at the end of the 14 threads. So we're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Okay, and now we will take our existing tie rod end. Okay, there's a half, 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5, 6.5, 7.5, 8.5, 9.5, 10.5. But we're going to get this rack slid back into place and see how we can get this job going down the other direction. I'll make sure some of those lines underneath aren't in the way. Okay, we're back at it. We're going to come up from the top here and kind of take a look at where we are and what might be binding us a little bit. We've still got to get this guy. We've got to get this around this guy right here. All right, we're getting closer. 90% in place. Okay, we've got the rack lined up. It is seated exactly where it needs to be. So I think at this point, I'm going to go ahead and put a little WD-40 on these bolts and get these put back in to get the rack secured. Okay, a little bit of an update. We had a little bit of delay because we got the rack is back in. I had it in before, but then noticed that I had inadvertently, when I put it in, I had put it over a hose combination on the opposite side, so I had to pull it back out and then rerun it such that the tie rod would go underneath the hose, and there was no point in taping that or videoing that because it didn't really show anything. We also, with the help of my son, who had a really good angle, once we got the rack seated, we were able to put the mounting bolts, the steering rack mounting bolts right back in. They are now just finger tight to hold the rack in place, and we had no trouble reattaching the intermediate shaft to the spline. The only trick for that, which was just impossible to photograph, was when I put the intermediate shaft on the spline and didn't want to go down all the way, and I couldn't force it, and I didn't want to force it. So what I ended up doing was taking a very small, very thin screwdriver through the hole where the pinch bolt goes, and ever so slightly rotated it left and right, and not even, I don't even think, a degree, and then all of a sudden it snapped, the splines lined up, and it slid right smack into place, and it's in perfect position. So all I have to do now is reapply the pinch bolt and torque it up to spec. That part will be done. So the only thing that's really left now, guys, is to reattach the power steering lines, and for that we're going to have to attach some new O-rings. We're going to do that, and then we will tighten up the bolts. And we've got a couple of brackets to remount. We will remount the stabilizer bar brackets and reattach the stabilizer bar link here. And if all of that goes according to plan, then we can reattach the tie rods to the wheels, and we will be just about done. So we're making progress. I think we're over the hump. We're over the worst of it. The parts that I was the most concerned about, we've got to replace those. We've got to replace those O-rings. You don't want to reuse those. That'll be probably the next thing that we have to work on, and then reattaching the input lines. Okay, I decided, just for the sake of completeness, we're going to take a view. This is from the passenger side. I haven't shown much of this from the passenger side, but just so you get a view of what this looks like. When I put the rack in the first time and thought I'd gotten it done the first shot, I came over here and then realized that I had let the thing run over the stabilizer bar and over this hose run right here. And that was because the stabilizer bar has been moving all over the place since I detached it from the link on the other side. Obviously that will stabilize itself once I get it reattached. But now this side looks good. I temporarily stretched it just long enough where we could get it into the knuckle over here just to hold it. But we're in good shape. Everything looks good from this side. Again, we've already started the rack mounting bolts. They're in place, only finger tight. We'll tighten those back up here in just a little bit. I think the next step we're going to undertake is to replace the O-rings on the power steering lines, and then get those threaded and restarted and tightened up. Okay, before we reinsert the power steering feed lines into the steering rack, we're going to have to replace two O-rings. One on the return side, one on the pressure side, because that's one thing that you're not supposed to reuse. The particular size is supposed to be a metric P11, which I have an assortment in this package. I couldn't find just P11s, and in particular I wanted to make sure these were nitrile. Nitrile O-rings tolerate the presence of petroleum-based fluids like transmission and steering fluids better, and they're less likely to leak. We're going to have two of these guys. I'm going to pull these. Now what I'm going to do, we'll get under and I'll show you where I'm going to aim. I'm going to take this little pick tool and I'm going to peel the old O-ring off, and then I'll just slide these two O-rings on the ends of the feed lines, and then we'll start to thread them in. But that's what we're going to do. We'll get under there and kind of show you where we are. Again, it's going to be impossible for me to hold the pick and the lines and the camera. I'm hoping I might get some photographic help here before this is all said and done, but that's what we're going to do. We'll at least get you oriented what we're doing when we're under there. This are where the two lines go, and those two openings right here, I don't have room to put my finger in even to point, guys. I'm sorry. You just can't imagine how cramped it is in here. You just can't. Anyway, I can see them in the frame, so hopefully you can see where I'm talking about. Those two openings right there, dead middle. I'll put some graphics on there to highlight. Those are the those are the ports for the receive for the lines, and then we have the return line, the feed line. Both of those guys are going to get new O-rings. On the ends of the lines, there is a ring that you can kind of see. The actual ring that we're replacing is at the very tip of that input line, and it's nowhere near a P11. That's way too big. And the old, when I touched that O-ring, it basically disintegrated with that pick. So we're going to have to figure out the right size, and I'll mention when I figure it out. Okay, we have replaced the we've replaced the O-rings on the power steering lines that go back into the steering rack. Here's the thing. I had read a couple of different places on older Siennas where a P11 was the O-ring size to use. There was no way in the world I took the O-rings off of the ends of both of these lines, and there was no way they were a P11. They just simply weren't. It was probably, I even took into account the fact that, well, a new P11 might be a little bit bigger because this ring has been compressed for 11 years, but these weren't even remotely the same size. I sized these up as best I could, and I believe the best match for this particular input line was a P6, and it fit over the lines, and it looks like it fits exactly where the old ones fit. So, you know, here's another DIY caveat about this project, guys. There are and ladies, I certainly don't mean to restrict this. Anybody watching, anybody undertaking this, there is so little information, even when you consult some of the Sienna publications, about the size of the rings, the size of the feed lines, and it varies even within the same model year. That you have to be prepared to not be prepared, even if you take into account what you think is your best information, because it may not be right. Again, this is an 08. I think it's different from an 06, from an 04, and it's certainly different going forward to the last model year for this generation of Siennas. So, and I don't know if this appears to be the best guess I can make. I think this is the right size. So the next thing is I'm just going to get them threaded into those shafts. Going to pull those protective boots off the inputs and put these back in here and button this thing back up. All right, I have gotten the two power steering lines reattached to the input shaft. I used an 18mm stubby, as I mentioned earlier. That's the only way I could get back in there. There is absolutely no way I can get a torque wrench in there to make sure I get this up to spec. I don't know how you torque it from the other side. There's just not enough access. I put as much, and I can't quite tell if I'm aiming in the right place. The view here is just awful. We're looking in from the driver's side toward the input shaft. I tightened those as hard as I could within reason, and to the point where I couldn't go any farther, and I didn't want to overexert. So we're just going to have to take a little faith that I can get them as tight as they can and they won't leak. That's just a risk we're going to have to take at this point. So now we're down to we're going to tighten up the mounting bolts that you see hopefully that you see right there, and one on the other end. And then we're coming down the home stretch. It'll be a matter of reattaching the stabilizer bar mounting bushing brackets, and then reattaching this stabilizer bar to this end, and then reattaching the tie rods, and we'll be good to go. So we're pressing on. Okay, folks, we are coming down the home stretch of this unintentional marathon. We have reassembled and tightened down, torqued down all of the stabilizer bar bolts. We have the stabilizer, the mounting bolts, and the 3 of those were easy to get to, torqued down with no problem. Those are rated about 120 inch-pounds. They're just basically, which is 120 inch-pounds is not that much. Somewhere between 120 160 inch-pounds. It's not a tough spec. They want that to be snug, but they don't expect that to vibrate loose. We're getting ready to, I reassembled the stabilizer bar here, so it's back together. We reattached the power lines, all the bolts, the nut over there. Most of it was just repetitious fumbling. It wasn't anything particularly eventful. So what we're down to now is putting the castellated nut back on the edge and then torquing it down before we put in the cotter pin. And the torque spec for this is 36 foot-pounds. And here is our handy-dandy torque wrench, already spec'd to 36 pounds. Okay, we're there. And we've even got a clear hole for the cotter pin. We don't have to turn it anymore. There. That cotter pin on that side is done. I'm going to go do the other side real quick. And you know what? It's going to be time, gulp, to test all of this. Are you afraid? Nah, I'm not afraid. We're just going to make it work. Well, folks, it is approaching 6 o'clock Saturday night. We have attached both of the tie rods. We've torqued them up to factory specs, put in the cotter pins. We have reattached everything there is to attach. There are no more leftover bolts. We are to a point now where we're going to refill the power steering reservoir, and we're going to check to see if we've got this thing done. Pray for a little divine inspiration. It all works. I'm going to need this. We're first going to open the hood. I'll tell you what, this has been an adventure, to say the least. Okay, this first line is hot max, the second line is cool max. So we're going to top this off, and I expect it's going to take a lot more than. And the official spec for this is Dexron 3. That's from the manual. So we have one each bottle of Dexron fluid. And heck, that just happens to be at just the right angle. So we're going to take advantage of that. Okay, that's full cold. We will put that in there. All right, folks, moment of truth. Nothing else to do but to start it up and see what happens. Haven't put the wheels back on yet. Oh, here goes nothing.
What I didn't realize at the time was that there is still considerable air left in the system that I had not bled. You can kind of hear the power steering pump gasp a little bit 2 or 3 times. You didn't notice it at the time. I found this out later when I realized how low the system is.
We already ran low a little bit. The bleeding procedure, as I understand it, is to spin the wheel full left and full right several times, about 10 each. So we're going to try this again. That's one full cycle. 2 full cycles. 3 full cycles. Okay folks, we are now full in our reservoir. We have checked underneath for leaks. We've seen no leaks. We pulled the car off the jack. We pulled the chocks from behind the wheels. We're going to disengage our parking brake. We are released. And folks, we are going to go on a test drive. A couple of housekeeping notes. When you change the steering rack, you will need to perform the steering zero center alignment. You can do that with some of the OBD2 scan tools. I've done videos on the AP200. The advanced features in that tool will do the wheel angle alignment sensor for us. At this point, I'm just going to take this for a swing around the block, make sure it seems coherent and drivable, see how far off we're drifting, and then probably first part of next week we'll schedule a time with the alignment shop to get it fixed up and finalized, and we'll be done. So let's go for a test drive. Just going to set you guys on the dash. Okay, we are way out of whack. Okay, something's not right, guys. This is not cool. Something is definitely not right. Oh, that just sounds terrible.
After this test drive failed, it led me to try to reconfigure the angles on the tie rods on the steering rack, and that still didn't solve the problem. It was only after a little bit of consideration that I finally figured out what the problem was, and here it is.
We have great news. We have solved our problem with the Sienna steering rack. And it turns out it really wasn't a steering rack problem at all, per se. I borrowed my son's ears, brought him along for a test ride so he could hear, just to get a fresh set of ears, even though he's not an automotive type at all. I just wanted his intelligence. He's a real smart kid. Just to tell me what he thought he was hearing. And as we were driving around the block, and we would get much beyond 5 or 6 miles an hour, and the stability control would go off, and this grinding noise would come up, thinking I was grinding the pinion gear or something. My son said something that turned a light bulb on, and he said, "Dad, wait a second." He said, "That sounds like something is trying to stop the car." And then it was like I had a duh moment, that it was the ABS coming on, stopping the car. And then about the same time I realized what was going on, he said, "Are you sure this isn't the computer in the car now seeing goofy information about this new steering rack, thinking the car is trying to destroy itself and is shutting it down to prevent it from damaging itself?" And I suddenly realized 0-point calibration. I did not realize. I knew that there is a thing called a 0-degree steering calibration angle that you have to set, but I was not aware that it was. I thought it was like an oil pressure sensor, not oil pressure, but an oil change sensor. You simply had to reset it. I did not realize it would have such a drastic impact on drivability. Unfortunately, the only scan tool that I have is an Autel AP200 with any kind of advanced functions, and it will not reset the steering. It has steering angle sensor capability, but it will not do this age of Sienna. It will only go back to 2011. Shame on you, Autel. Go back and get the right version. So what I did do was I happened to have an OBD2 cable, a specific diagnostic cable, and the Toyota TechStream software that came with it. I fired up the TechStream software that I had on my old Windows 7 laptop and went into, after I went into the connection mode, here we'll just, wrong button, we went after we started the system and connected, it told you about all the different modules that it knows about. We went in there and selected ABS, VSC, and traction control, and then went into the live data, and then they have a reset memory function. That reset memory function then fires up. It says use this function after replacing the skid control ECU or the G and yaw rate sensor. This resets the learning value of the skid control ECU. In other words, the parameters that it's learned have already get erased and recalibrated for the new steering rack. So I hit next, and it comes up with this prompt that says, welcome to the reset memory utility. Press next to proceed. It will then tell you to put the key in, it will stop the vehicle, turn the ignition on, and then you hit next, and it will reset it for you. And you turn the engine off after 3 seconds. You turn the engine off, and then you keep the engine off for 3 seconds, and you're done. Now, I've already done it, so I don't want to do it again. And my laptop battery is just about to die. This is an old laptop, but it runs better on Windows. This TechStream software supposedly runs better on Windows 7. The bottom line is now I still have a crooked steering wheel. If I'm going straight, I've got to get this thing cattywampus about this much. And unfortunately, I think it's a combination of things. I think it is due to the some adjustments I made to the positions of the tie rods, thinking that I had reassembled the front end out of whack, apart from being straight, such that I needed to adjust the difference via the adjustments on the tie rods. So I probably introduced more of an error than was already there. If I had reset the zero angle calibration sensor Saturday afternoon when I was working on this, I think I'd be done right now. Lastly, all the other component on this steering wheel being off is the intermediate shaft on the steering gear probably needs to be rotated just a few degrees, taken off, steering wheel rotated very slightly, and then put back on. That would probably fix the gross alignment issue. But I think what I'm going to do for right now is I've driven this car several times now. I took it around the block. I've taken it up near the expressway area. It handles, if you understand that you got to adjust for the fact that the steering wheel itself is cattywampus, it steers just fine. In fact, it steers beautifully. The rack is working exactly the way it's supposed to. So in the very narrow vein of getting the rack replaced, we're fixed. We are still showing the VSC and stability control lights off. I'm expecting that would go away with the steering angle. I suspect there's a sensor that shows this steering wheel sensor. I suspect there is a sensor that detects the steering wheel angle that is out of whack because it's so far off, and an alignment would probably fix that. So I'm not too worried about that. But the biggest issue is the rack is replaced. We did it. It was a pain. It took infinitely longer than I expected. But given the fact that most Toyota dealers, certainly an OEM rack at a Toyota dealer would have probably been a $1,500 job. A third-party shop with probably a remanufactured rack would probably still have been in the $800 to $1,000 ballpark. No matter how you slice it, I think I've come out ahead. It's been a learning process. Do I want to do this again in the near future? Not so much necessarily. And fixing this yaw rate sensor would be something that the typical DIYer just isn't going to have. I happen to have this because I bought this particular TechStream software to program a key tool that I showed in a different video.
Anyway, bottom line, again, I cannot give a big enough shout out to Tom2RN, a fellow YouTuber who did another video on replacing the Sienna steering rack. He was very helpful, very responsive to questions, super nice man. He didn't have to answer me, but he did, and I sure appreciate it. Kind of gave me a little pep talk along the way, told me some basic things to check, and I sure do appreciate his expertise and insight and his willingness to help. I think that's one of the neat things about all these YouTube channels. We're just helping each other out, trying to learn and do a few things ourselves and try to save a little bit of money. That's the whole point of the DIY efforts that I undertake and the videos that I make. I would love to know your comments and your inputs. This has been a tremendous adventure for me. It's the biggest project I've ever undertaken. We're not 100% there, but I think the remaining issues are solvable. I don't necessarily think we have to go into a big video to document it. If you like the DIY videos I do, please subscribe to my channel. I love to do these. Like I said, it's obvious I'm not a mechanic, but I love to learn. I'm willing to get my hands dirty. I love to share the information and help other folks out. Subscribe if you like it. Hit the notification buttons. Let you know when I do post a new video. If you like the video, hit the thumbs up. If you don't like it, give me a thumbs down. It doesn't bother me. I don't mind constructive criticism. If you're just going to say something tacky, then I'm not interested in that, and I'll just ignore it. But I would love to hear good constructive input from anybody that might be following. I thank you for all the followers that do watch the videos and give me a thumbs up occasionally, leave a little comment here and there. I sure appreciate it. I enjoy doing these. Thank you for your time and your patience in watching me go through this process. I'm sure I could have done a lot of things more efficiently and more simply, and certainly if I'd have had more experience in the mechanical world, I might have made this less complicated for myself. But the bottom line is, we did it ourselves, or I did it myself, and that was my objective. And it's a Toyota OEM rack in this Sienna, and that should be good for the life of this car. Thank you for taking the time to watch. We hope you'll join us again for the next video whenever it comes out. This is DIYDave. Have a blessed evening. Have a blessed evening. Signing off for now. Good night, everybody.
So what we're going to do here, I can go ahead and show you how this works. So we're in the TechStream software. We have the cable hooked up to the OBD2 port. We're in the TechStream software. We're going to select the ABS, VSC, and track module. And hit next. And we're going to do reset memory. And we're going to hit next. And it will contemplate its navel for a moment. Welcome to the Reset Memory utility. Clears the learned memory of the ABS ECU and the yaw rate sensor. So we press next to proceed. Vehicle is stopped. Ignition is on, and it is. Turn the ignition switch off. Wait for 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. Turn the ignition switch on. 1, 2, 3. That should do it. So let's restart it. They went off. Okay. So let's disconnect and see if we can take it for a little spin. Well, as promised, if I found something relevant about the fix on the VSC and ABS light, I was using the wrong function on the TechStream software. What I did is, when I went into the ABS VSC track menu, I was using the reset memory. That solved the original drivability problem. When I first reassembled the rack, and it was still going into kind of a limp mode with the braking system coming on. What I did this time to permanently clear it was to go into test mode. And test mode then did a VSC and ABS recalibration. When you engage that mode, you see the ABS and the VSC lights. The ABS light blinks on and off while the VSC light is steady.
and then after 10 to 15 seconds, both lights will blink, and when both of them start to blink, the calibration is done. And now when I take the car around the block, there is no more VSC or ABS light. So we're in business. Calibration is done. We're still a little bit off. We'll take it to a shop and get it done. This is finally the end of our repair. Thanks for watching, and I hope you guys have a blessed day. Bye-bye, everybody.